total war, victory belongs to the nation that can build faster than its enemies can destroy. From prototype super weapons that never left the factory floor to rifles churned out by the tens of millions, production numbers tell the true story of World War II. Today we are ranking every major weapon of the Second World War by how many were actually built. We will climb from the rarest failures to the most mass-produced tools of victory. Let's begin the countdown. Kicking off our list at the absolute bottom is the German Schwerer Gustav railway gun. Only 2 of these 800mm monsters were ever completed. It required a crew of over 2,000 men and took 3 days to assemble. The Gustav fired exactly 48 shells during the entire siege of Sevastopol before being dismantled. It cost more than an entire fleet of tanks and accomplished almost nothing. This was the peak of German over-engineering and the symbol of strategic insanity. Next up is the Maus super heavy tank. Germany completed exactly 2 of these 188-ton behemoths. The Maus was so heavy it could not cross most bridges and could barely move on paved roads. Neither prototype ever saw actual combat against Allied forces. One was blown up by its own crew during the Soviet advance. It remains the heaviest fully enclosed tank ever built and the greatest waste of German engineering resources. Moving on to the Horten Ho Tu-29 Flying Wing. This revolutionary jet-powered aircraft existed in only 3 completed examples. Its radical design made it nearly invisible to British radar systems. The war ended before it could enter mass production and prove its potential. Modern stealth aircraft owe a direct debt to this forgotten German prototype. It was decades ahead of its time, and decades too late. Let's continue with the Karl Gerät siege mortar. Germany built only 7 of these 600mm self-propelled monsters. They were designed to crack the heaviest fortifications in existence. Each shell weighed over 2 tons and required a dedicated crane to load. While effective against static defenses, these weapons were impossibly slow and required constant maintenance. They represented the final gasp of siege warfare in the modern age. Coming in next is the Messerschmitt Me 163 Comet. Germany produced around 370 of these rocket-powered interceptors. The Comet was the fastest aircraft of the war, reaching speeds over 600 miles per hour. However, its volatile fuel mixture killed more German pilots than enemy fighters ever did. The engine had a tendency to explode during landing, and the fuel dissolved human flesh on contact. It was a technological marvel wrapped in a death trap. Next is the legendary German FG-42 automatic rifle. Only about 7,000 of these paratrooper weapons were ever manufactured. It was a select fire rifle that could function as both a battle rifle and a light machine gun. The precision machining required made it impossible to produce in meaningful quantities. German paratroopers who carried it considered it the finest infantry weapon of the war. It directly inspired the American M60 machine gun that followed. Let's look at the Tiger II King Tiger heavy tank. Germany managed to build only 1,347 of these fearsome machines. On paper, it was nearly invincible, with its thick-sloped armor and devastating 88mm gun. In reality, it broke down constantly and drank fuel Germany did not have. Allied tankers feared it, but German logistics officers feared it even more. Every King Tiger that rolled off the line represented resources for 5 Panzer IVs. Now we move into weapons that actually reached meaningful production. The Sturmgewehr 44 changed infantry combat forever. Germany produced around 426,000 of these revolutionary assault rifles. It combined the range of a rifle with the firepower of a submachine gun for the first time. Had it arrived 2 years earlier, the Eastern Front might have looked very different. Instead, it came too late and in too few numbers to change the outcome. Every modern assault rifle traces its lineage directly back to this weapon. Moving on to the American M1918 Browning automatic rifle. The United States manufactured approximately 188,000 BARs during the war. It served as the squad automatic weapon for American infantry units across every theater. The 20-round magazine limited its sustained fire capability compared to true machine guns. Despite this flaw, soldiers loved its reliability and devastating firepower in the assault. It was the weapon you wanted when your squad hit the beach. Next up is the German MG42, perhaps the most feared machine gun of the entire war. Germany produced approximately 400,000 of these devastating weapons. Allied soldiers called it Hitler's Basso because of its terrifying 1200 round per minute cyclic rate. The sound alone was enough to pin down entire platoons. platoons. It was so effective that the Americans essentially copied it for the post-war M60. The MG42 proved that sometimes quality and quantity can coexist. Let's continue with the German MP40 submachine gun. Over 1.1 million of these iconic weapons were manufactured throughout the war. It became the visual symbol of the German infantryman in newsreels and propaganda. The stamped steel construction made it cheap and fast to produce. Its reliability in harsh conditions earned it respect on every front. The only real criticism was its relatively slow rate of fire compared to Soviet designs. Coming in next is the American Thompson submachine gun across all variants. The United States produced over 1.5 million Thompsons for the war effort. It was expensive and heavy, but it delivered devastating 45 caliber firepower. Paratroopers, tankers, and NCOs all prized this weapon above standard issue rifles. The Thompson proved that American industry could produce quality at scale when it mattered. Now things start to get interesting with the German Walther P38 pistol. Over 1.2 million of these modern sidearms were manufactured during the conflict. It introduced the double-action, single-action trigger system to mass military service. A soldier could safely carry it loaded and fire instantly with a single trigger pull. It replaced the expensive and complex Luger as the standard German service pistol. Every modern military pistol owes something to this groundbreaking design. Moving into higher production numbers, we have the Soviet SVT-40 semi-automatic rifle. The Soviets manufactured approximately 1.6 million of these advanced infantry weapons. It gave Soviet troops semi-automatic firepower that German riflemen could not match. The design directly influenced the German Gewehr 43 that followed. However, it was complex and required more maintenance than the simple Mosin-Nagant. It was eventually supplemented rather than replaced due to production realities. Next is the Soviet TT-33 Tokarev pistol. Over 1.7 million of these brutal sidearms were produced for Red Army officers. It fired a screaming fast 7.62 by 25mm cartridge that could punch through early body armor. The complete lack of manual safety made it dangerous to carry but fast to deploy. It was a pure offensive weapon designed for a nation that valued attack over defense. Simple, rugged, and utterly reliable in frozen trenches. Let's continue with the American M3 Grease gun. The United States produced around 700,000 of these deliberately ugly submachine guns. It cost only $15 to manufacture, compared to $45 for a Thompson. The slow rate of fire actually made it more controllable and ammunition efficient. Soldiers mocked its appearance but respected its reliability. It served for decades after the war ended because it simply refused to stop working. Here is where the ranking heats up with the American Colt M1911A1 pistol. Over 2.7 million of these legendary sidearms were produced during the war years alone. The massive 45 ACP round offered stopping power that no other service pistol could match. It remains in limited military service over a century after its original design. American soldiers called it the Yankee Fist for good reason. This was the weapon that ended close quarters arguments decisively. Moving on to the German Luger P08 across all wartime production. Over 3 million of these iconic pistols existed by the end of the conflict. Its toggle lock action gave it unmatched accuracy and a grip angle that felt natural. However, it was expensive, complex, and too delicate for harsh field conditions. It became the most sought-after trophy for Allied soldiers on every front. The Luger proved that elegance and combat effectiveness don't always align. Next up is the Japanese Type 99 Arisaka rifle. Japan manufactured approximately 3.5 million of these bolt-action rifles during the conflict. Early production examples were well-made and accurate infantry weapons. As the war turned against Japan, quality dropped dramatically in late war examples. Some rifles produced in 1945 were genuinely dangerous to fire. The Type 99 traces Japan's industrial collapse in real time. Let's continue with the British Lee Enfield rifle across all wartime production. The British Empire produced over 4.2 million of these legendary bolt-action rifles. Its 10-round magazine and smooth action made it the fastest firing bolt action ever fielded. A trained soldier could put 30 aimed rounds downrange in a single minute. It served from the trenches of the First World War through the jungles of Burma. The Lee Enfield was the rifle that held the empire together. Coming in next is the British Sten submachine gun across all marks. Over 4.6 million of these crude but effective weapons were manufactured. It could be built in bicycle shops using scrap metal and basic tools. Resistance fighters across occupied Europe depended on airdropped Stens for survival. Soldiers mocked it as a plumber's nightmare, but it fired when it needed to. The Sten proved that ugly weapons can still win wars. Now we're in elite territory with the American M1 Garand semi-automatic rifle. The United States produced over 5.4 million of these revolutionary infantry weapons. It gave every American rifleman 8 rounds of semi-automatic firepower against enemies with bolt actions. General George Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. The distinctive ping of the ejecting clip became the soundtrack of American victory. No other nation fielded a semi-automatic rifle as standard issue during the war. Approaching the legends, we have the Soviet PPSH-41 submachine gun. The Soviet Union churned out approximately 6 million of these devastating bullet hoses. Its 71-round drum magazine and 900 rounds per minute made it a close-quarters monster. Stalingrad was won by Soviet soldiers spraying these weapons in brutal room-to-room combat. It was cheap, simple, and almost impossible to jam in frozen conditions. The PPSH-41 was Stalin's answer to the Blitzkrieg. Next is the American M1 carbine, the most produced American firearm of the entire war. Over 6.2 million of these lightweight weapons were manufactured for the war effort. It was designed for rear echelon troops who needed something lighter than a Garand. The 30 caliber cartridge was less powerful but perfectly adequate for most combat ranges. Officers, tankers and paratroopers all preferred it over heavier alternatives. It proved that not every soldier needs a full-powered battle rifle. Entering the top 5, we have the legendary M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun. The United States produced over 2 million of these devastating heavy weapons during the conflict. It could destroy aircraft, light vehicles and infantry positions with equal effectiveness. The 50 caliber round it fired remains the standard for heavy machine guns worldwide today. Remarkably, guns manufactured in 1943 are still in active service in modern militaries. The Ma-Deuce is arguably the most successful weapon design in human history. In fourth place is the German Karabiner 98K, the backbone of the Wehrmacht. Germany produced an astonishing 14.6 million of these bolt-action rifles. It was accurate, reliable, and served from the invasion of Poland to the fall of Berlin. The 5-round magazine and bolt-action limited its firepower against semi-automatic opponents. Despite this disadvantage, it remained the standard German infantry rifle throughout the entire war. The 98K armed the largest military force Europe had ever seen. Taking the bronze medal is the American M1 steel helmet. The United States manufactured over 22 million of these iconic protective devices. Its distinctive shape provided better protection than any previous design while remaining comfortable. The steel pot saved countless lives from shrapnel, bullets and debris. Soldiers used it as a wash basin, a cooking pot and an improvised shovel. It protected American heads from Normandy to Okinawa and remains instantly recognizable today. In second place is the Soviet RGD-33 hand grenade. The Soviet Union produced an almost incomprehensible 50 million or more of these explosive devices. It was simple, reliable and could be manufactured in civilian factories by unskilled labor. The removable fragmentation sleeve allowed it to function as either offensive or defensive weapon. Every Soviet soldier carried them by the half dozen into combat. It was the most produced explosive device in human history, but the absolute top spot goes to the weapon that truly won the war in the East. The undisputed king of mass production is the Soviet Mosin-Nagant rifle. During the Second World War alone, the Soviet Union manufactured over 37 million of these bolt-action rifles. The design dated back to 1891, making it ancient by Second World War standards, but its simplicity was its greatest strength. It could be built by peasants, maintained by conscripts, and fired by anyone with 2 hands. It survived being dropped in mud, frozen in ice, and run over by tanks. The Mosin-Nagant armed the largest army in human history and equipped the force that broke the Wehrmacht. From the desperate defense of Moscow to the final assault on Berlin, this rifle was there. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't modern, it was simply everywhere, and in total war, everywhere is what wins. That concludes our definitive ranking of every major World War II weapon by production scale.